Every night at this time, the great debate, and tonight's premise, the U.S. should lift the Cuban embargo. President Obama has opened the door by easing the travel ban for Cuban Americans. A bill before Congress with support from both parties would make Cuba open to all Americans for the first time in decades. Joining us right now, New York Congressman Charlie Rangel, who says, yes, it is time to lift the embargo. And on the other side, Ileana ros-lehtinen of Florida. She was the first Cuban American elected to Congress. We want your opinion, too. Vote by calling the number on the bottom of your screen. First, opening statements from each. We have 30 seconds for each of you on the clock. Congressman Rangel, the premise, the U.S. should lift the Cuban embargo. Make your case.
Well, we've had it for 50 years, and it certainly hasn't worked. I truly believe that the communist Castro has used this as a reason to justify his dictatorship by making America the enemy when it's not. We're losing from trade, friendship, the fight against terrorism. We got big problems in our hemisphere, including working with the OAS, and we shouldn't be the only one, besides another nation, having an illegal embargo against a sovereign country. If we can deal with China, if we can deal with Vietnam, and we're trying to deal with North Korea, I think we should end the embargo.
All right, Congresswoman ros-lehtinen?
Well, what has to change in Cuba is the tyranny, the dictatorship, not U.S. policy. We are not to blame for the ills of the communist dictatorship in the island of Cuba. When Fidel Castro illegally power-grabbed himself into military power 50 years ago, he took away the rights of the Cuban people. Sadly, nothing has changed. That's not the fault of U.S. policy. That's the fault of that dictatorship. There's no freedom. There are no multi-party elections. There's no freedom of the press. You can't even have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Cuba. That's an illegal document.
But Congresswoman, if you could answer the question or address the point that Congressman Rangel made, that if 50 years have passed, that much time, and there has been no change, why not adjust the policy in some form?
Excellent question. Let me turn that around. 50 years, every single country on earth has been wheeling and dealing and trading and going to tourism, doing everything that it can with Fidel Castro's Cuba. In 50 years of economic entanglements with Cuba, what has changed? The United States is the only country that has had an embargo, just as we had an embargo on Haiti when it had a terrible military junta, just as we had an embargo on South Africa when they had their terrible apartheid policy. The United States has moral principles upon which we stand, and I think those are just as right when it was in Haiti, when it was in South Africa, and the Cuban people are no less meritorious of freedom and liberty and solidarity than those individuals were.
Congressman Rangel?
But 50 years, certainly it doesn't apply to a billion people in China. It doesn't apply to other communists. And I personally believe that the greatest ambassadors for freedom are the American people. I am really offended that my country doesn't have enough confidence in Americans that they can't go wherever they want to go, communists or non-communists. We're strong enough that we don't have to yield to communists in Cuba. But I can imagine American tourists, our young kids, playing their hip-hop and letting the world see what Americans stand for. The whole idea that we're the ones putting up a wall against Americans leaving there normally is the communist countries that won't let the people out, and we won't let Americans go where they want to go.
You know, I find it interesting that Charlie doesn't want to even pass the free trade agreement with Colombia, yet when it comes to communist Cuba, he wants to lift all restrictions. We're ready to do wheeling and dealing, it doesn't matter with communist Cuba, yet Colombia, oh boy, there are human rights violators in Colombia. It's such hypocrisy that I really can't stand it, and I think that we've got to be honest. It's not U.S. policy that's keeping the people of Cuba afraid. It's Castro and his dictatorship. We are not the bad guys. We are the best country that has given the most help to the impoverished Cuban people, while Castro sells that medicine overseas while the Cuban people go without food and medicine. Shame on Castro. Don't blame the U.S.
I don't think anyone's blaming the U.S., and it's not Wrangel that really wants to trade. It's our business people, our pharmaceuticals, our farmers, and the majority of the people really in the House. And now the President of the great United States of America. I went with the President to Trinidad, and we had 33 people in the Organization of American States who really didn't care whether Castro joined them or didn't join them, but just objected to the United States, saying who can and who cannot be recognized by them.
Well, Tony, what do you say about the arrest of these two former U.S. government officials who were caught doing espionage for Castro? They were solicited by Castro, and here they were doing great damage to the United States while we're making overtures and playing footsies with the Castro brothers. Castro's doing everything it can to penetrate our government, our military institutions, and our State Department. What do you say about the arrest of these spies?
I would say, first of all, I'm not familiar with the facts, but I don't think these 5 people have been a serious threat to the strong United States of America. But I tell you this, if we broke off relationship with every country that had spies in the United States, and not only Russia, but several other friendly countries, we would have to break up relationship. No, what I want is what's in America's interest, and it's not getting back at some people that are spying. What I want is a normalization of our relationship and incentives for them to become democracies, not give Castro an excuse for the type of government he runs.
I don't think Castro needs an excuse to be a dictator. He is a bad guy, and U.S. policy should be excluding bad behavior, and that's why we should keep the
China? I mean,
I'm no apologist for China.
Okay.
You should ask that to somebody who supports China.
Well,
it ain't me, babe.
Our business people do it.
Shame on them.
Well, let me tell you.
Not me.
Let me tell you.
Quickly, Congressman, last point.
I truly believe it's in our national security. If we're fighting terrorism, we're fighting narcotics, we should have everybody there on our side that we can work with.
I don't trust Fidel Castro to fight on our side.
Give it a chance.
Right. Give him a chance.
50 years.
He jails people because they speak about freedom. If they have the Martin Luther King speech, I have a dream, you go to jail for that.
We got more people in American jails than all the other countries in the world
combined. There's no moral equivalence between the United States and Cuba. Please.
Okay.
It's a failed dictatorship, and we should not be propping them into power.
All right, guys.
Give travel a chance.
Hang on. We're going to take a